It was daunting. You know, it was the first time that I had the responsibility for a full-time orchestra, so it was a very important turning point in my life. I mean, I really think it marked the beginning for me of my professional life. I'd worked with other orchestras before, with a chamber orchestra in Denver, with the Long Beach Symphony, which is a marvelous orchestra, but it was a part-time orchestra, and there was something that the musicians did in addition to their regular studio work, basically in Los Angeles. But taking over at the Virginia Symphony, it was with the sense that this was a full-time living, this was a full-time professional life for these musicians, and I was responsible for that. I was responsible for helping them grow as musicians, for helping them become part of the fabric of the community, for every music, all the music that the people in Hampton Roads was going to hear, orchestral music, was going to come from this orchestra. And it was an overwhelming sense of responsibility for something much bigger than me, responsibility for the musical life of a community. And I've never stopped thinking about that Virginia Symphony is at the core of this musical community, and every piece that they do, every audition that they hold, every player we hire, every choice we make of soloist, every new piece we choose has an impact on a very large number of people and on the growth of the kind of cultural environment of our region. So it's very humbling to think about that. And yet it's very joyful at the same time, the idea that I was working with an organization that could really make a difference in a community, that could really mean something to a community, to young people, to music lovers, to people who maybe had never heard an orchestra before. It's been an incredible privilege for me in this 20 years. I mean, looking back on the orchestra, all the musicians who've played on that stage, and all of the wonderful guest artists we've had and pieces we've done, it's so filled with joy for me. And most of all, thinking about the community, you know, the people who've supported us and who've come to the concerts and loved the Virginia Symphony through good and bad times. That tells me a lot about our American spirit, our American community, who we are in Hampton Roads. And it makes me very proud. It makes me very proud to be a citizen of this community when I realize how this community has embraced the Virginia Symphony.
Joann Falletta, conductor of the Virginia Symphony, talking about her first experiences with the orchestra 20 years ago. Good evening, this is Dwight Davis, welcoming you to a special program in honor of Joann Falletta and her 20th anniversary season with the Virginia Symphony. This evening, we will hear Maestro Falletta talking about music and the symphony and its musicians. She'll be speaking with WHRO-FM's Anthony McSpadden and myself, Dwight Davis. And along the way, we'll offer some Falletta bagatelles and music from the historic Carnegie Hall concert by Joann Falletta and the Virginia Symphony. Let me go back before 20 years ago, Joann, and ask you about at what point it was that you decided that you were going to be a conductor rather than a coffee house guitarist.
Well, you know, it happened when I was very young, and I had been playing guitar since I was really a little girl, 7 years old, but I listened to orchestra concerts a lot, Dwight. My parents would take me to Carnegie Hall, and I'd buy a lot of records, of course, at that time, of orchestra music. And I just fell in love with the orchestra. I just couldn't believe what those pieces sounded like. I mean, I loved playing guitar, and I loved my little pieces, but I couldn't believe what the full orchestra sounded like. And watching them, the faces on the players and their commitment to excellence, it was like being in the presence of something inexplicable, almost sacred, that to see what was happening on that stage. And I thought, if I could be in the middle of that, what else could I ever want? But I didn't know what a conductor did, so it took me a long time to start to learn. And as I think, we're all still learning as conductors about what is our profession. But I know that it's something I've wanted to do all my life, and there still is no more wonderful place than to be in the middle of a symphony orchestra to me, rehearsal or concert.
How much can you really learn about conducting by attending, for example, a conducting class? I mean, you can learn to beat time, you can learn to cue the sections, but a lot of that has to be instinctive, doesn't it?
A lot of it has been instinctive. A lot of it is just taught to you by the musicians who are playing for you. They are the greatest teachers. But I suppose in school what you need to do is you need to develop the kind of preparedness to learn from them. With your teacher and as Juilliard yelling at you all the time and saying what's going wrong. I mean, you develop a way of keeping your ears open all the time. And then when you're actually working with orchestras, they teach you. They teach you every minute you're on the podium. If a sound that a cello section makes doesn't seem relaxed or warm enough, it's probably because of the way the conductor is using his or her body. If woodwinds are having trouble playing that chord together, it's probably because of something that the conductor is doing. So if you're always listening to the result of what's happening around you, you can be changing and growing and learning all the time. And that's why it's an amazing profession, in that you never really completely understand everything you're doing. You don't understand the piece of music as well as you will even the next week, but you're always learning from the musicians around you. I don't even think they realize that they're teaching you as much as they are.
So it really is a question of listening. And then when you go from orchestra to orchestra, you hear different things because each orchestra is different.
And that's the wonderful thing. You go to an orchestra with a concept in your mind of the piece, of the shape of the piece, of the pacing of the piece, of the way everything fits together. And then you leave a lot of room for changing that depending on the orchestra. Because my philosophy, Dwight, has always been that the concert belongs to the orchestra musicians. They need to be a very big part of that. If an oboist wants to linger on that phrase and it's musically beautiful, we should allow space for that to happen. For a string section that has a little more weight and wants to play it with a certain vibrato, all of those things are part of who that orchestra is, the personality of that orchestra. So you're changing constantly. You're listening to them. You're making accommodations. You're being inspired. You're getting ideas from those musicians. And you wind up at the end of the week with probably something quite different than you thought of when you first gave that downbeat at the start of the first rehearsal.
Do you ever get the sense that this orchestra for you has been almost like a child, and you've watched it grow up over the last 20 years? And if so,
definitely.
How have you seen this orchestra change in that 20 years?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, 20 years is a long tenure for a music director, and I guess it was not even something I thought about when I came. If you had told me I'd be here 20 years later, we would have been surprised. But I think what's happened is that the orchestra has been constantly changing. It's never been stagnant. I mean, it's been always growing. It's been expanding its horizons. It's been musically challenging itself, so that the orchestra for me has always been a challenge. It's always been something that is asking me to be a better musician. I mean, I guess that's the way I would express it. I've always felt from the musicians the need and the desire to go to the next level, so looking to me to be able to do that. So I always had to be thinking and growing and learning from all kinds of different sources, guest conducting, other orchestras, things that I would bring to the Virginia Symphony, repertoire that I discovered to help them constantly grow. But in a way, it is like a child, and it for an orchestra of our budget size, which is relatively small in major symphonies, I think we are the smallest major symphony, budget-wise, it is an enormously sophisticated orchestra because of this attitude of constant evaluation that they've had, constant desire to get better, to the point where I'm very spoiled by them. I'm really spoiled because they can do anything. I mean, in terms of accompanying, I've never heard an orchestra accompany the way they accompany. A soloist comes and it's like the musicians are reading their mind, playing chamber music with them. They know exactly what they're doing. In terms of listening to their colleagues, I said that it's almost like they are reading their minds. They're so sophisticated about how they think about music and about how they listen. And they're always listening that there's no other orchestra that can really touch them for the kind of subtlety and nuance that they have. And that they've developed over 20 years of wanting to be better. So I look at them and I'm amazed by them. I'm just always amazed by them. And then personally, I was thinking of these 20 years, how much we've sort of been through together. People, in happy things, people coming into the orchestra and meeting their spouse in the orchestra. We have a lot of married couples who met there. People having their first child, or maybe finding their first little house, and it's always big occasions for us to celebrate. People, losing spouses, losing parents, so that finding again some sort of touchstone in the orchestra family that life changes, but we're always there for them, and that's been kind of personally a very valuable, very wonderful experience to have that sort of musical family, and you see people 20 years after you started working with them, and there's a kind of level of just warmth and connection to them that you would never have otherwise.
The first time Joann Falletta's name appeared on the cover of a VSO season brochure, it was misspelled.
some of the conductors of the past. They imprinted themselves on the orchestra, and that was the way it was done.
Yeah, I think they did. I think they had a way of conducting Dvorak 9, and it was going to sound the same no matter where it was. And, of course, a conductor has to come to an orchestra with a very firm concept of the piece. I mean, you can't go up there and try and figure it out when you're on the podium. But if you're not allowing the opportunity for the musicians to change and inform and inspire, you're missing out something fantastic, because I know you believe this too. Music is so fluid. It's always different, even from one night to the next. And by not allowing that to happen, you miss out on a great deal of the beauty of music. So it seemed to me that as I've been conducting, the role of the conductor seems to me to be more flexible rather than less flexible, so that I'm creating a situation where musicians can breathe and move constantly, and they're moving around a sort of frame that I'm setting up, but they're always moving around it, and they're always improvising in a way, in a comfortable situation where they feel protected, they feel safe, but they feel that they can be individuals, and that's a very lofty goal. I mean, we would never quite reach it, but the idea that all of the musicians in the orchestra can feel that they're equal partners in what you're doing, that they are contributing 100%, they're playing in a way they want to, they can have a freedom in a situation where everyone's playing, 100 people are playing. So it's something that we aspire to, and it makes music endlessly fascinating.
Let me stay back pre-20 years ago for a minute and talk about Leonard Bernstein, just because you had an association with him and were able to observe that intense musicality and intense emotion that he emitted.
And it was a long time ago, of course, at Juilliard, but I will never forget the times that I spent with Bernstein, because he was like a force of nature, Dwight. I mean, he came in to teach us, and of course, you can imagine we were always terrified when he came, because he was the most famous musician in our country, at least, partly, and maybe in the world as well. So famous and so accomplished, and such a genius. And he'd come into the room, and the room would kind of become electrified by his presence. He was always kind to us, but I think the thing that always struck me is that we were always working on technique, but being clear and beating in the right place, and showing this and all the kind of technical things. And Bernstein didn't care anything about that. I mean, I'm sure he did. Of course he did, because the orchestra played for him.
No, but I know what you're saying. Yeah.
That was nothing that was foremost in his mind. It was all about the music, about the situation, about what was it needing to be expressed. And when he conducted our orchestra, and he always did that for us at the end so we could see him, we were amazed, because he was the antithesis of a conductor trying to be clear, and yet he was perfectly clear. Mm-hmm. The musicians, the young musicians in Juilliard, they were all students who had never played a Mahler 2 or Mahler 5 before, understood exactly what he was doing. And I never forget that feeling of he led by sheer passion and commitment to the music. I mean, he could have not even moved his arms. There's something about his face, his eyes, his breathing. You knew what he wanted somehow. I mean, it was magical, and he had that magic, and it taught me a lot about what was really important in music. And just seeing him in those sessions, I'll never forget that.
Hmm.
A few VSO musicians were hiding behind some risers on stage, observing a concerto conducted by Joann at the Kennedy Center.
20 years ago, I can remember what the symphony sounded like, and it has grown immeasurably under your guidance. Are you are you conscious of that? I know you're always striving to get better, to sound better, but
Well,
it really is a sea change.
But change happens very slowly. And I think that's one of the things as I get a little older now, I find that I realize that nothing worthwhile happens quickly. And that you come into an orchestra and you want to make this change and that change and add strings and do different repertoire. And the change that matters is going to happen incrementally by, again, every piece you do, every audition you hold, every minute of rehearsal time. And so the changes happen so slowly, Dwight, that if you ask me, I can't really remember what the Virginia Symphony sounded like 20 years ago. But I know that every time we get together in a rehearsal, it's with a sense of growing. I mean, the musicians are totally committed to excellence. And every minute of that 2.5-hour session we have together, they are concentrating on excellence. So when we come back the next day, we're at a slightly different level. And that happens so slowly, but it's because of them. I mean, they've realized, I think, early on that we could be a wonderful orchestra, but that it would take a lot of work on all of our parts. Was it worth it? Yes. And they said that right from the beginning. It's worth it. We're willing to do difficult music. We're willing to work hard. We're willing to put all of the other problems of our lives and the difficulties, financial difficulties we have, leave them outside the door of that rehearsal room. And when we're with our music, it's 100% excellence, and that's what we're concentrating on. And it's a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. Every new person who's come into the orchestra has sensed that around them. There's total commitment to excellence, and they've become a part of that. So the musicians have created this environment where excellence flourishes in a good spirit, in a spirit of collegiality, of support, of caring for one another. I've never seen anything quite like it. I mean, it's a magical feeling here.
It really is, and I can attest to that, having known and talked to these musicians for these 20 years. They are content, excited, and happy to perform in this orchestra with you conducting.
They are. And they feel valuable to the community, and I think that makes a big difference to them. They feel that when we're playing for our audience, we matter and we're connected to them. And sometimes you can do that in a mid-sized city more than you can do it in New York City or Los Angeles, where you can get a feeling that the audience is there to hear your music and you are making a difference in their lives. They're not there for any other reason. They're there because this is important to them. And that's what could be more gratifying than that, to think that we're making, in some ways, a difference in people's lives in a beautiful way. That those 2 hours they spend with us somehow gives them a sanctuary, maybe, takes them to a different place. And I know for sure, Dwight, that when people leave the concert hall 2 hours after they sit down, they are different. They come in, they're frazzled, they're worried, they've got things on their mind, they've had trouble parking, and they're tired maybe, and they sit down and they leave at 10 o'clock, and somehow they're in a different place.
Yeah.
And it's the power of music.
Bernstein said, and I can't remember quite the reference, but he said, after listening to a piece of music, I think it was Beethoven, he said, you hear this and you know that something's right with the world.
Exactly.
Something is right in the world.
And I think I even felt that as an 11-year-old at a concert, hearing this music and feeling that if a human being could create that, we have to be all right. I mean, and something is right with our world, with all of the, as you get older and you hear all the terrible things and listening to news and everything that's wrong with the world. But at the core, music proves to me again and again that there's something about the human spirit that is truly beautiful. And this is a legacy. We have a kind of living legacy that we're constantly adding to in music, of proof of that, of something that is right with the world. I think his words really say it all.
You have introduced in the last 2 decades music to the audience and to the orchestra that is new, relatively new, or at least new to them for a first hearing. I understand that is part of your mission to play the music of contemporary composers, to get this music exposed, at least give it a listen.
Yeah. No, I feel very strongly about that because I feel that, well, part of us, of course, is a museum. I mean, we are a beautiful museum, and that we're proud of that we are the caretakers unbelievable treasures of the past, and we love them, and we love to play them over and over. But we're also a breathing, developing, growing institution. So it's very important for me to help people understand that there's a lot of music still being written for orchestra, and there will be much more music being written, and all of that sheds light perhaps on who we are, just as looking back and hearing Mahler sheds light on what the early 20th century was like. So as we add to our repertoire, we're opening windows and doors for them. We're keeping our repertoire alive and current and meaningful. And I think it's just very interesting to hear pieces of the past with contemporary pieces, or to hear pieces of the past that people don't know.
Yeah,
There's a lot of that, as
too.
you know, because, here at HRO, I've made so many new discoveries just by listening to you all the time of pieces from the past that I'd never heard of, wonderful composers. And being able to delve a little bit more deeply into the repertoire, I feel is our job. We want to be the ones that introduce people to new things alongside the things that they love.
Right. So it's in a way a balancing act.
It is.
To bring the audiences things they know and love, and yet expose them to things that are worthwhile.
That's right.
New things that are worthwhile.
And you know what? We have to be careful too, because when we choose new things, we have to first of all be completely committed to them and be convinced that this is a good artistic product, and then we have to play it as if our lives depended on it. We've all been to concerts where the obligatory new piece, the conductor's got his head buried in the score, and the musicians look tentative and confused and vaguely unhappy, and then they get to the Mahler First Symphony, and all of that is gone. They're transformed. Well, we've got to bring some of that commitment we have to Mahler to the new work too, and I think Virginia Symphony musicians have done that, because we've found pieces that we care about, that we believe in, and we're trying to communicate to the audience, we love this music. We want you to come to know it. We want you to discover it too. We want it to be yours. I mean, it's a very giving thing, because when the musicians are playing, they're playing for one reason only: to share it with the audience, in the hope that the audience will be touched, will be moved, will be interested, will then know that here's a new piece that I never thought I would like, and I do like it. It does mean something to me. So,
a piece, just because it's new, does not mean necessarily that it's worthwhile. What you have chosen over the years are those pieces that have substance and speak to us, just like Beethoven or Mozart speak to us.
Well, and that's been my aim, and we've sometimes, perhaps gone a little bit astray there, but we've tried to find pieces that we believe in, because I think sometimes doing a performance of a piece you don't believe in actually weakens the case for discovery. You've got to do things that you believe in. I always tell young musicians when they're in school, find composers your own age that you believe in. It doesn't have to be everybody. You don't have to do new music indiscriminately, but find a handful of composers that you believe in, champion them, play them again and again, play their new piece, commission them to write things for you, so that you become a partner with them. And that's always been exciting to me, to be partners with people who are now alive creating music.
You've made now 40, 50 recordings or something like that. Do you find that as satisfying as the live concerts?
Making recordings is a very different experience than the live concert, and it's been good in many ways for Virginia Symphony, because it's taught us to listen in a different way. When we're making music live, there's a lot we let go. I mean, we're like flying. I guess that's the best way I can put it. We're flying, and if we hit a little bump somewhere, I mean, mostly the audience doesn't know this. We have a little warble somewhere. We just keep on going, and it doesn't have any impact really on the overall pacing of the piece, or the overall strength of the piece. We're always thinking forward. What's happening next? When we're recording, we're thinking of every single detail, and we're keeping our ears open, and we know that this is what we are going to live with forever. So it teaches us to be much more critical. It teaches us to be have incredible focus for long periods of time, where you can't stop thinking, you can't stop concentrating, and it has to be right. So those skills, actually, if you learn them in the recording studio, you transfer them into how you think about even as you're playing. So I think recording, people don't realize enough what an artistic tool it is for development, because you are really listening magnified by 10 about intonation, about ensemble, about exactly how you sound on your instrument, and it's been good for us. And I'm very proud of our recording. I mean, that Carnegie concert, for instance, we recorded, and we've done some wonderful recordings, and they've been kind of benchmarks for us, the recordings. And so I think it is important for orchestras to record, to learn about themselves, and to develop as musicians.
Joann once did a hoofer dance on a dare and on stage during Leroy Anderson's famous sleigh ride.
Something else I would like to ask you about. I know most of what I know about your conducting is from recordings, listening to your recordings over the last several years, and because I've only been in this area for a short time. And I think that critically listening to your recordings, I would say that your greatest gift is one of being a colorist. You're very good at drawing color from an orchestra. And I'd ask you about the Virginia Symphony and over your last 20 years with this orchestra. How do they match up as a palette for you in that talent?
But Anthony, I think I've learned color from them. I think that listening to our woodwinds, our brass players, the quality of our string playing, I think that started to form in my mind 20 years ago a kind of color ideal, so that when I hear pieces or I do them again, I think of Sherry's sound on the oboe. I think of Debbie Cross flute playing, which is incomparable, and I think that they've taught me sound, and then in inspiring me with this, I've tried to help them expand their concept too. But it came right from them. I mean, I guess I was really lucky to have an orchestra with such fine players, and the possibility of this miraculous sound. So when I go to an orchestra, I'm thinking of the Virginia Symphony sound and how I have that in my ear and how I have that as an ideal in these pieces. I mean, I think that I look at these big pieces and I realize that I learned them with Virginia Symphony, and I learned that sound in those pieces. So I try sometimes to reproduce that sound when I go other places. But color to me is very important, color and architecture. I mean, the sense of always unfolding in music and always knowing where it's going, but not hurrying it, but knowing where it's going. So that somehow in a totally inexplicable and miraculous way, the piece makes sense at the end, just by listening to it, which I still think is a kind of miracle. We sit down and we expect our audience to hear a 45-minute symphony, beginning to end, only with their ears, nothing else, to make perfect sense of that language, which has no words in it, and to understand what at the end what has happened, wordlessly. I mean, it's really something that still amazes me.
20 years, is there any performance that you can remember conducting where it just all came together and it just became transcendent?
There are moments of that, I think, in every concert. There are moments where you are just amazed at what you're hearing. But of course, then there are those concerts that seem surrounded by some magical aura. And I guess the musicians would say the same thing. The night in Carnegie Hall was, for us, one of the most magnificent evenings. We had gone to Carnegie with a lot of trepidation as a smaller orchestra. We were preceded on the stage the night before by the Philadelphia Orchestra. So it was rather daunting. Being on that stage, and I just remember I have so many memories of that day. All of our musicians came. Of course, they were there for dress rehearsal, and everyone was taking pictures of each other on the stage of Carnegie, which is not allowed. And the production person, the union person, came up to me and said, no one's allowed to take pictures on the stage of Carnegie Hall. I'm going away for a couple of minutes, and then I'm coming back. So we got the picture. We took our photographs, but he was so kind, because I think he realized how important this was to us. And I remember Bev Baker coming up to me saying, Joann, I went last night to hear the Philadelphia Orchestra. What are we doing here? As he actually said, what are we doing here? I said, Bev, it's going to be great. It's going to be great. And it was great. It was one of those
that
nights.
That Elgar was just magnificent.
Yeah, everything came together. And I think it just made us believe in ourselves. And that was important for the 10 years after that, because then we knew we had gotten to a certain point and we could get better. And I think that sense of, again, dedication to excellence has been a hallmark of these musicians.
What does Joann Falletta pull off the shelf and put on the CD player at 11 o'clock at night?
You know, when I listen to just listen, when I'm not listening to think about someone's interpretation of a piece or some historic thing about a piece, I always listen to pieces that I would never conduct, which is a lot of early music. I love to listen to early music, medieval Renaissance music, because, of course, I would never conduct that. And I find that now seems to me otherworldly almost. I mean, it's something so amazing. So I love that. Or, I'll listen to music again, contemporary music that I would not conduct. But I find when I listen to music that I'm actively involved in conducting, I listen too judgmentally. Mm-hmm. I listen about interpretation. I listen about things that I like, I don't like. I wish I had done that, or why didn't that work, or is that really an A sharp there? But when I did it, it was an A natural in the score. It's too judgmental. So I try and listen to music that I have no actual connection with, and I enjoy that.
Joann was once kissed by a sitting United States president in front of thousands of people. Well, okay, technically he was a standing president for the kiss, but you get the idea.
When you look at your role as the conductor of this orchestra, people in the audience, they see the conductor as the stick waver, the back of the person is all they ever see. But I'm sure that you feel much more connected to the overall arts community here in Hampton Roads. How do you think your role has played out over 20 years here in the arts? And have you seen an amount of support that you think is good, or are you satisfied with it?
Well, that's been one of the wonderful things about being here, is that I do feel very connected to the arts community, because the region is of a size where you can get to know your colleagues you can help them, you can collaborate, you can understand what their struggles are, they understand what your struggles are, and hopefully together you create a more cultural environment. And I think we all have, and that goes to the Arts Festival, the opera, the stage company, the museum, Chrysler Museum. In these 20 years, we've become a much more cultural region because of my colleagues and how we've all believed in that we could be a cultural region and that our community wanted that. So we're in a very different place, and I think that we should celebrate that, because despite the financial difficulties, and there have been some daunting financial difficulties throughout our country and in this region as well, that we believed we were a cultural haven, and we are. We created that. We brought that to our audiences, and they responded. That's what they wanted. So it has made me feel that these 20 years has not been wasted. These 20 years have led to something wonderful happening in this region, and will continue to, because I think we've laid the groundwork now for Hampton Roads to think of itself as a cultural area, and they'll never let go of that. I mean, that's who they are now, and it's great to see that. It really is great to see that. It's been, I know I will say this, it's probably been the most wonderful artistic experience I'll ever have in my life, these 20 years. So in a very good way, and I feel very lucky, because I've as I said, it was really my first truly important orchestra that I worked with, and I learned, in these 20 years, I learned everything I know about orchestra. I learned most of my repertoire here from these musicians. I learned how to be a music director. I learned how to worry about fundraising and ticket sales, and all of that I learned here. And I can't imagine a more beautiful 20 years in terms of the people that I've worked with. I mean, it's been a dream situation for Conductor to work with the staff and the board, of course, but mostly with the musicians, because I've never seen a group quite like this that is so filled with positive spirit and puts the music before anything.
The Virginia Symphony, conducted by Joann Falletta from their Carnegie Hall concert. And we heard, of course, Joann Falletta talking about her 20 years as conductor of the Virginia Symphony. Our congratulations to her and the orchestra for 2 decades of great music in Hampton Roads. She spoke with Anthony McSpadden and myself, Dwight Davis. Also heard on the program were Tom Reel and Gail Pittman, offering up vignettes from 20 seasons, 20 vignettes, behind the scenes with Joann Falletta and the Virginia Symphony. That booklet available from the Virginia Symphony. We hope you've enjoyed this program in celebration of Joann Falletta's 20 seasons with the Virginia Symphony. More with Joann Falletta and the Virginia Symphony coming up momentarily with Raymond Jones here at 90.3 WHRO FM, WHRO FM Digital, Norfolk.